This is the 10th key population community of practice of the Global Prevention Coalition in collaboration with partners and specifically the South-to-South Learning Networks, which has logistically and programmatically supported this. And it's actually nearly an anniversary. It's the 10th session of this community of practice. Big thank you to Parinita, who has been really the driving force in making everything happen behind the scenes, and she will introduce the logistics before we open.
Thank you, Clemens, and welcome everybody, who is joining online. This is our first hybrid session. So we have a live audience and we also have people online. So anybody who needs interpretation and are sitting in this room, you would have to use the Zoom line and you have to register into the Zoom line for interpretation. We have English, French, Portuguese, Russian, and Spanish. And though it's written over here, use the Q&A box for the online participants. We would suggest and recommend please use the chat box so that we can see the question over here when the question is written. Please use the chat box for any questions that you may have for the speakers. So at this point in time, I would welcome Dr. Mandeep and Dr. Anjali to come in and start the session. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'll go ahead and get started and maybe set the scene a little bit and then turn to Mandeep. So first, welcome everyone. And it's really fantastic to see we have over 80 people online as well. So I love to hear that this is the first time we're making it a hybrid session and we really have a strong representation online and people coming in room. I also recognize we're in the middle of the lunch hour, so I really want to appreciate everyone that has come here. As Clemens mentioned, this is the 10th meeting of the Key Population Community of Practice, and it's really exciting again to be able to use the opportunity of being here together in Munich to come together as a community of practice. We've talked a lot this week in Munich about the fact that we in the global HIV/AIDS response, we're at a crossroads. While there's tremendous progress that we've seen in the response over time, we are in a real pickle. We're in a really problematic situation in that we still have 1.3 million new infections that are happening annually. And this is really, really troubling because while we're making great strides in certain regions and in certain countries and in certain populations, when we look at what's happening with new infections, we are 3 times where we should be for the targets for 2025. So again, we have to do everything we can to share, to learn, to accelerate, to really make a change. We also know that 55% of new infections were among key populations and their sexual partners, and this is up by 10% since 2010. So again, we really need to focus where we see the gaps and where we see the problems that are occurring. HIV prevention needs for people from key populations remains largely and stubbornly unmet, and gaps exist in all regions of the world. So outside of sub-Saharan Africa, more than 80% of new HIV acquisitions are among key populations and their partners. So this is really pointing to where we need to focus our efforts. What we've heard throughout the conference and what we know too well, and that we're not doing well enough, is we need to really make sure that we are working together to offer options and make choices, all choices available, and that we are working together with populations from key populations in all their diversity and really tailoring our efforts to address their needs. Everything from condoms to PrEP to U=U, harm reduction, circumcision, new technologies that are coming online, including we heard a lot about injectable PrEP, and that's all fine and good that we have amazing options that are available and more on the horizon. But issue that brings us together today is that we know too well that it's not enough to have amazing biomedical solutions when we have policy barriers and harmful laws that are preventing services from being accessed by key populations, costs that are prohibitive, for example, discrimination and stigma that are hampering access to these services, and violence and the like. In some countries, and we report this in our Global AIDS Update report, in some countries, we're seeing shifts going backwards, new infections skyrocketing. And the reason this is happening is because we are not addressing those structural barriers, those policies, those laws that either protect or completely prevent what's happening for the key populations that we need to serve. So we're really excited about the session today to make sure we're sharing practices and coming together around laws and policies that are important and critical and necessary for key populations in all their diversity. So with that, it's my pleasure to welcome the chair for the session today, Dr. Mandeep Dhaliwal, who you all know, who's the director of UNDP's HIV and Health Group, and who's a longtime advocate and expert in this area. So Mandeep, over to you.
Thank you. And it's always a pleasure to share a microphone and a podium with Anjali. And thanks so much for, I think, setting out where we are and why we are really, really at a very perilous moment. We have all the science, that we've had more science, more tools, more advancements, but they're not getting to key populations. We also know that there are issues around access, which we've heard a lot about at the conference. And I really want to praise the executive director of UNAIDS for calling out the access issues for the new technologies. That's super important. We've learned these lessons. We learned them again painfully during COVID. Let's not repeat that now for the new technologies. That said, one of the most persistent barriers over the last 40 years is around structural barriers, laws and policies. And a lot of people talk about the laws on the books and how long it takes to reform laws. That's true. But the law is also felt in communities and on the streets. And the people who know best on what to do and how to overcome those barriers are the communities who are the most affected. It's people living with HIV, it's men who have sex with men, it's transgender people, it's sex workers, it's people who use drugs, it's people who, and those intersecting identities. These are not discrete categories. We haven't even gotten our head around that yet. It's also people in prisons and closed settings. My colleagues from UNODC would call me out for not mentioning them. So what is it that we need to do now? We know the majority of new infections now are in these populations. How do we remove these structural barriers? And I was saying to my team as we were walking over here, you know, a lot is known at the global level, at the level of principles and norms and resolutions of the Human Rights Council, you know, about what to do at that level. The norms are there, the standards are there. We also know at the country level, you know, at the national level, what is it that we need to do? But there's a gap. And that gap is what we now need to fill if we're going to get to, I don't even like to use the word end of AIDS because it's going to be with us for many years, as we point out in this year's Global AIDS Update. We'll have 40+ million people living with HIV even past 2030. But what we need to do now is figure out what we need to do at the community level. UNDP has, with support from PEPFAR, partnered with communities in 41 community groups in 22 countries, looking at how we can support them to remove these structural barriers. And you're going to hear about that today. So communities of practice now need to shift from the global and the regional level, and we need to really create the community of practice from the community level and connect to that. So we've got the global community of practice, we've got the regional community of practice, but now we need to really support the creation, the expansion of community level communities of practice of key populations. That is where the knowledge is on how to remove these structural barriers to prevention programming, to treatment programming, and to basic realization of dignity and rights, which is central to the HIV response. So I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have today. You're going to hear about evidence. Part of what we've done through this partnership with PEPFAR is create an evidence base. And it's not evidence in the traditional public health sense of evidence of, percentage of infections averted. It is evidence of the strategies, the tactics, the tools that communities are using to overcome these structural barriers, to be able to access prevention programming and treatment and other services. So I'm going to stop talking because I want you to hear more from them. It's very exciting. So you're going to hear about some of this evidence. And then I'd like us to talk about how we can energize, expand, and scale these community experiences and communities of practice, because that's what's going to get us to the next stage. And I'm really excited that we're doing this through the GPC. We've had a very healthy discussion in the GPC over the years about the importance of structural barriers, and to think about that in the context of prevention, not as a silo that's separate. So I'll stop there, and it's my pleasure now. The objectives are here. I'm not going to read them because everybody can see them on the screen. And let me hand over to Kevin Osborne and Belize from my team, who are going to take us through the evidence.
Hi, everybody. Oh, let's try again. Hi, everybody. Okay. So as Mandeep said, part of where the rubber hits the road for communities, and especially of key population communities, is where the laws and policies inhibit and stop access to services. So what we wanted to do was trying to say, well, we all wanted to start from scratch again. So hopefully what we've done in this is trying to look at some of the evidence base that's come from communities. So next slide, please. This is going to just give you a rapid overview of some of the tactics and approaches. And we hope that it will either resonate with you and go, yes, that's what we need to do. But I think I'd like us also to be super critical. And by that, I mean, are we just using the same tactic, or are we seeing a strategy that really moves towards law and policy reform? Because I think that's the conundrum we all need to face, that it's like we need to make sure that we're not just using one tactic, but moving in the direction of that law reform. Next slide, please. So as Mandeep said, this was a program that's supported through PEPFAR. I'm going to let you read through all of this, but mostly I don't know if you can see at the very bottom, there are 3 pieces of practice that we did. We've got this evidence review that I'm going to talk about, or my colleague will. We've got a digital good practice compendium, and we've got the law reform spectrum. So in the presentation today, we're going to talk about those 3 pieces of tools that are connected, but slightly different. So we did it by looking at from communities that you'll see in the countries around the 21 countries that are listed over there. We've added Malawi to this list as well. Next one, please. Here are just some of the grantees from around the 4 regions of the world that have looked at different aspects of developing this tool. So how we did it was through community action. It wasn't just UNDP thinking about it or speaking to co-sponsors. It was very much community saying this is what worked. So Belize, I'm going to ask you to come and talk a little bit about some of the good practice we've seen and how we got to where we are.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Just to add on what Kevin has said, one of the things that we did, especially with the evidence, or rather we plan to continue doing, is to make this evidence accessible to the communities in a way that they understand it and in a way that they'll be able to use. So next slide, please. So like Kevin said, we have different pieces of evidence that we have put together, but I'm going to first really highlight the importance of the Global Commission and its Global Commission report from 2012 and its 2018 supplement, which really did recommend the importance of the law and how implementation and enforcement of the law is important and can create really an enabling environment for key populations and people living with HIV. So secondly, we do have the evidence review, and you will find copies of it at the just near the entrance. So this evidence review, I'm going to speak more to it later on. Then the third piece of evidence is the Spectrum, a tool for key population led law reform and policy, which you'll also have at the back of the room. So next slide, please. So the evidence review that this document that I've spoken about, so it is a result of a couple of years of looking at published documents and publications and reports and gray literature that were published between 2018 and January 2018 and December of 2022. So what we did was to look at the reports that have been the reports and documents that have been published to see what are some of the tactics, what are some of the strategies that key population groups and community groups are using to really work towards changing punitive and discriminatory laws. One of the limitations of the evidence review process was that while we made effort to look at and identify a broad range of literature, there is a chance that we likely missed some specific documents. So from our side, what we think that this is a living document which we can continue to update with new information as time goes by. So another important aspect of the evidence review is that different drafts of the document went through a peer review process. Some community members also took part in that review process. We had a validation session, and of course, through the internal UNDP quality assurance process. So during the process of coming up with this evidence review, like you can see, we were able to identify 119 documents and review them. As you will see, we had 39 documents from Africa, 35 globally. But one thing that sticks out is that you will see that we only had 3 documents that were focused on the Middle East. What does that tell us? It tells us that we need more documentation of practices and strategies that are being used by colleagues in the Middle East. So these publications in the review, what we did is that they were evaluated, they were analyzed, they were assessed, and we looked at how they described or reviewed the tactics and strategies and approaches that were being used by community groups. So then we documented that to ensure that it's all captured in a way that really shows how communities are working. Next slide, please. So I'm going to speak about the 14 tactics. So you will see one of the most spoken about tactic was community mobilization of key populations and people living with HIV. There were instances of direct action where we could see protests, we could see demonstrations being done by communities. Of course, there were instances of building the evidence base through research and documentation. And one important aspect of this particular one is there was a wide range in which communities were building the evidence base. It was through stories, through case performers that they had in their offices documenting the different instances and cases that have been reported to their offices. Of course, there was a lot of legal and policy environment monitoring to see what governments are doing, to see how they're holding governments accountable and things like that. There was a lot of working through coalitions and networks, and you will bear me witness that in a lot of the countries we see key population consortiums, we see networks of people living with HIV, which have really been an important aspect in pushing the needle for progress in a lot of the work that is being done. There were instances of strategic litigation to really either hold the government accountable or ask courts to provide direction on different aspects, or also just for courts to declare certain laws and actions unconstitutional or otherwise. Then there was, of course, engaging with international and regional processes and bodies. In Africa, for instance, there was the African Commission on Peoples and Human Rights process. There was also engaging with processes such as the UPR process and the CEDAW process. Then, of course, there was access to and provision of legal services, and I will tie that closely to enforcing protective laws and strategic litigation, which was really found across the region and especially in the Africa region. Then, of course, there is also creating of safe spaces for key population groups and people living with HIV, where they can engage and have conversations with policymakers, including religious leaders and duty bearers in different instances. Of course, there was use of information, communication, and technology to pass across information and educate their members on different issues. Media-based strategies, including traditional media and social media, was also recorded. And finally, the two also very common ones was training and sensitization of duty bearers on HIV law and human rights. This includes members of parliament, judicial officers, and those who enforce laws like police officers. And then, of course, there was capacity building of the rights holders, including key populations and people living with HIV. Next slide, please. So what were some of the overall findings? We found 5 most documented interventions, and these were capacity building of rights holders, building the evidence base, access to and provision of legal services, training and sensitization of duty bearers, and the establishment and working through coalitions and networks. One other thing we found is that most of the tactics, strategies, or approaches were not always used as one, but they were always used almost always in conjunction with each other for greater results. And we also found from the evidence review that, again, and this is something we all know, law and policy reform is really a long, non-linear process, and it is important that we continue monitoring continue monitoring the process, but also engage in advocacy to move the process forward. And of course, a human rights-based approach is really important in the whole process. Next slide, please. So from the evidence review, and I'm not going to speak to all of them, but some of the key recommendations that we found from the evidence review, and I'm going to speak to specifically the ones for key population and communities, key population and PLHIV communities, is there is importance to scale up the use and documentation of the tactics that they use. And this is something that we have learned even with the SCALE initiative that we are working with communities. It is important that they learn across themselves, either within the country or across the country, so that they are able to share their challenges, share how they can learn from each other and move the needle. Then, of course, a theme that has gone across the that has been spoken about during the conference is the importance of collaboration and building relationships that work especially with other community groups. So I will quickly speak about the Spectrum document. So kindly let's move to the next slide. So this Spectrum document is an evidence-informed tool that has been developed to help to advance and accelerate law and policy reform. The way in which it has been done is that it has 3 distinctive features: pathways, critical enablers, and pathways, critical enablers, and building blocks that if communities use together, they can be able to move the needle with regards to law and policy reform. Because of time, I'm not going to speak about the different distinct the distinct features of the Spectrum document, but I would like to request you to look at the document. It speaks about how you can work together, how you can work through the pathways and the critical enablers. And it also really documents some of the questions that as communities you can ask yourself as you move along the process. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Kevin to take us through the rest of the presentation.
Maybe just on that, Belize touched on the spectrum, and I want to give you an idea. You know, like when when we were all kids, maybe your parents gave you my mum gave me one of those kaleidoscopes. Remember those things you look through and you see and you change it? That's the idea here. So the idea being you look through it, you decide in the green, what is the best pathway for your national country, for your context? Maybe it is a referendum. Maybe it is through litigation. Maybe it is through, so choosing the pathway, and maybe it's a combination of those pathways. Then around the side, you'll see those building blocks, the context, the knowledge, and all those details. And as you turn these around, you find a different combination. So that was the logic of the spectrum approach. But I'll leave you to engage in the tool. The next one, please. These were the ideas around them. In the interest of time, it's all there. And under each one, we've asked, communities helped us say, what are the critical questions for each of these pieces? So we're hoping this is literally a tool that can be used. Next one. So maybe I'm going to just end off with 3 things. How has it been used already? We've seen the tool in the top right-hand corner. This was a meeting supported through UNAIDS in the regional office in Asia Pacific, where communities worked with the tool extensively. On the right-hand side, and this happened 2 weeks ago, it was the network of people who use drugs in South Africa who've used the tool to say, how can they create a roadmap for all communities who use and inject drugs in South Africa around the pathway to law reform? And the last one I'm going to refer to is about, and I think that's a critical part of what our conversation on key population prevention needs to be. We can talk about key population leaders being instrumental in driving it forward, but allies are absolutely important, especially in this climate. So this was an article that was written by the incoming president of the IAS and colleagues, Dr. Beatrice Grinstein, who basically says, you know, medicines alone will not end HIV. We need to do law reform. So we've got the health sector already buying in. Next one, please. The last one is of the tool is a compendium, and this is, I'm going to ask you to, it's a living piece. So we've just launched it. If you go to the UNDP website, you'll see this. And it's a tool that you'll be able to go in. We're going to ask everybody, there'll be opportunities. If you've got good practice, please submit them. And then on this tool, and you can do it by country, by region, by tactic. You can say, I'm looking for work on sex workers who've done work on engaging parliamentarians, and you'll see all the good practice come up. This document or this compendium is only as strong as the evidence you all give. So we're hoping this will be part of one of the legacy blocks in some ways of all the work you're doing. So we'll look out for this as it grows. Next one, I think we're done. Yeah, and then there's a code if you don't see the documents at the back. Thank you very much. Community practice. Okay, we got 3 speakers that are going to now come forward. So we're going to ask Katlego from Sezonke, Siriam from MIST, and Ghana. Would you all come to the front, please, so long? We'll sit here. You've got some great panelists. And so I'm going to start, Katlego, if you want to start. Katlego, yeah. Well, Coley, are you doing it? Who's speaking for Katlego, for Sezonke? Coley. So Coley, the presentation's yours.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
So where is it projected? Okay, so then I'm gonna have to stand there. Good after, is it in afternoon? Yes. Time has been, actually my colleague who's supposed to be doing this presentation is not here. I don't know where it is. And yeah, this is the presentation. Okay, so we as Usisonke in South Africa, we are part of the South to South Learning. My colleague that was supposed to be presenting today is the one that is actually a champion of the South to South Learning. I am an alternate. So sex work in South Africa is criminalized in 1957. 2007, the client was criminalized as well. And then the call for decriminalization started in 1994. And we submitted the bill in Parliament in January 2023. The call was December. Yeah, I'm just trying to put my mind into these years. But then I think around the 2007 of the sex work criminalized, we have not seen client being prosecuted. That's the evidence that I'm 100% sure of. And I've reached out to some of the lawyers within the Women's Legal Center that we work with, because I was also trying to find out that as much as we are criminalized and how many clients that have been criminalized. So this definitely shows that the sex workers themselves, people that are rendering services, are the ones that are being targeted. And the clients are not targeted because they are source of income to the police. I think the report that she gave me was that less than 15, I think 11 of the clients that have been arrested. So the reason for the call for decriminalization, it's an important one. And in some countries and in some of our government platforms, they've actually sort of like looking into the Nordic model. Nordic model, it is to allow a client to but it is to allow sex worker to sell, but the client is actually a criminal. But then that is also a strategy of just making us stupid, you know, because the reason I'm saying that is when they're targeting my client, and then how am I going to advertise my potikwe? Because then I'll be still targeted. My move, they'll target me. Any man comes near me, then they'll know that that person is a client. So, which is why we're calling for the 100% full decriminalization of adult sex workers. Remember, and quote me, we don't work with underage, strictly with 18 and above upwards. So the criminalization marginalizes sex workers as around the safety and security. And 45% of sex workers that made that related. We have got 2 reports that I would share because there's a project that we've started, it's called Say a Name. So we've developed about 2 reports where you would be able to see the number of sex workers that have been killed. I was actually making an example to the second lady, because when we did meet and greet as South Africans, participants and delegates that are here, it was announced that she will be working on the, she's been approached to work on the children's who are HIV positive. And I asked that when I meet and greet her, I introduce myself, but then I asked that one of my colleagues is also working in a project that is focusing on sex workers' children that are HIV positive. So I explained that in most of the services and opportunities, sex workers are mostly left and behind at all times. So I make an example also of the statistics, and sometimes our government will be presenting that, especially the sub-department of women have been killed, and I would say sex workers are not listed and are not part of that statistics that has been shared. So it is the same as the statistics of sex workers that have been murdered are not also part of those statistics, which concerns us, because at the end of the day, we are women and we are sex workers before being, we are human before being sex workers. So the 71% female sex workers said that they've been exposed to physical violence. The criminalization, it is actually the a perpetrator or the cause of the exposed to physical violence. And just to say that women in general, we are experiencing violence, and especially South Africa, I think, is the highest country where women are being killed. And then 50% said that they have been raped. And all these percentages also, and to me, it's a percentage at the same time, challenges, I think, around safety and security, because in the rape, for an example, within the sex work criminal law system, it is difficult to report any a issue that you come across, maybe a rape that you come across, because then police would say that how can you be raped because you sell sex? But I did not consent for that, you know. So those are some of the challenges that I think we're facing. So access to health, the 2016 South Africa launches the National Sex Worker HIV Plan. And these are benefits of being part of civil society were being recognized within South Africa as of 2011. It's one of the best practice that I think it is important that you can learn from South Africa. We are involved, and there was this development of this plan, and also there was another plan that 2017 to 2022, the National Strategy Plan, and also PrEP in a criminalized system. And if I remember correctly, we are also the first a key population that we have actually asked that we also get to have access to PrEP and also the flavored condom, because we said as communities, we also need to improve in our business, making sure that we've got all those flavored condoms, which it does contribute towards economy in our country. But then I'll tell you the challenge, I think, around the plan that have been developed. It's so challenging to implement under the criminalization. So these are some of the barriers that we've been bringing to the attention of the conferences to say, as much as we are granted some funding to implement and to do some activities, but under the criminal law system, it is challenging. And it's very confusing that as a quick community, you're rendering services to me and I'm struggling to access those because I'm a criminal. So then that means one of my feet is inside, one of my feet is outside. So those are things that I think mainly need to be looked into when you're talking about putting communities in the forefront at first. Next slide. I'm sure hope that, okay. So this is one of direct actions that we do. This was it was in court, and if I'm not mistaken, there's a case that is trending in South Africa of this young boy that we have killed about 6 women. So yeah, I'm trying to remember this picture. So that's my colleague who's dancing in the front, was supposed to be delivering this presentation, and I'm hoping. And then he decided to appear in this so that you can see him there. So I'm hoping that I'm doing a good job on his behalf. Yeah, this is where you can find us. So please follow us. And yeah, this is our pages. And just to say that as Usisonke Sex Work led, the first and the one and only that was formed in 2003, and it has also gave birth to other sex work led in Africa. This is we are independent organization. Isn't that good? Thank you.
Thanks, Carly, for stepping in. And I'm going to ask everybody to think of this question. So I'm going to ask you to answer now, but for all of our panelists, as we think about prevention, what is the one thing that you think from a HIV prevention stand for sex workers, that if the law had to change or become more protective, it would help in access preventing services? Think about that for me, and I'm going to come back to you. The next speaker, please. From India, one of our scale grantees, I'd like you to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing for the trans community.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shriram. I'm the Executive Director of Mist LGBTQ Foundation. A 15-year-old collective turned into a foundation in India. We operate from Pune. And I don't have a presentation, but I'm going to show our website as a live example, where how we use tech-enabled solutions to address the global 10-10-10 targets and 95-95-95 target. So first I'll cover the 95-95-95 and talk about how we are addressing some of the structural barriers that the young key population face in India. So this is our website homepage. So we have multiple things. We are a one-stop. We call ourselves a one-stop solution for different kind of activities and needs. We put up our. We also have an online marketplace. If you go to Queer Bazaar link on the top. Yeah, so that's an online marketplace where we kind of sell queer merchandise, easily affordable and accessible to the Indian LGBTQ community. And we also do a lot of fun events because we also think art is one of the way that we can create awareness in a stronger way. So we do like the Saturday events where people can come, be there, who they are. So about 200 to 300 people attend every week, and they purchase the entry ticket or like the products that they want in our website. So whenever they purchase a ticket, we also show them, like if you click in any of the party poster, it will take you to a page where they can purchase an entry ticket, but indirectly we also show them that HIV services, scroll up please, down. Indirectly, we also show them like how easily they can take HIV services, or more down. Yeah, so these are the products that they may also be interested in. So even if they are not interested, we are giving it on their face. So, and it is completely free of cost there. So they tend to take services by themselves. And there's also like a lot of structural barriers when we talk about India, because a lot of people are not out in India, and even people are thrown out when they come out as LGBTQ. And a lot of time what happens is they do not want to take a self-testing kit, or they don't want to take a PrEP medication to their home, or they don't want to get it delivered when they are at work or when they are outside. So what we innovated is we told them, like, you can order a self-testing kit and a cute merchandise like a t-shirt or something. So we can discreetly pack or wrap the medicine box or the HIV testing kit in the inside a t-shirt, so that you don't have to tell your family or friends that you're getting a self-testing kit. You can say that I'm getting a t-shirt, so that they don't open it, or like you don't face that kind of discrimination. And also so what this gave us an evidence to us is we saw an increased number of testing. We saw increased number of people signing up themselves for PrEP. And we also covered mental health as one of the object, but I'll not touch that. And the second part I want to cover is about the contribution to the 10-10-10 targets through the SCALE initiative that we recently got a grant from. Thanks to UNDP and PEPFAR for getting us this grant and like allowing us to do this work. So what we did through this SCALE initiative is to arrange 4 regional conclaves and do a consultation within the LGBTQ community to find out what are the laws that are already existing in India but are not being followed or not being used or implemented, and what are the laws that are not there in India which is needed for the LGBTQ community to safeguard themselves in day-to-day life. And what we understood from this consultation is we made it into a 4 regional level conclaves, so that people was able to share their feelings, share their expression, share their thoughts in their local languages, which is not a common thing that used to happen. Either the conclaves are mostly in English or Hindi. So people from very way south who is not a native English speaker or not native Hindi speaker was not able to communicate their expression. So that we were able to cover through these regional conclaves, and we have documented a lot of laws that are in different verticals comparing to HIV or like housing or reservations or jobs, etc. So what we are going to do further through this consultation is we are writing a policy brief, and we are going to put it on our website and like give it out to other NGOs to circulate it among themselves, and also to take these policy document to smaller scale regions where people are still not aware of the laws that are existing, that they can use themselves to safeguard them whenever there's a crisis. So we're going to train the duty bearers and the community to understand what are the laws that they can use on a day-to-day life. Thank you.
Great to hear that. If you listen to what Suram said about some of the tactics that they're actually using in India, which are from some of the tactics that they are using in India that come from that document in some way. So it again verifies the tactics in practice. The third person is Ghana, who needs no introduction. Ghana from the Eurasia Harm Reduction Network, Harm Reduction Association, specifically speaking at sort of issues around people who use and inject drugs. Ghana.
Kevin. Hello. I will speak a bit about the what is criminalized in our case, and it's a lot what is criminalized. And next slide. It shows that in majority of our countries in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, like totalitarian states like putting people in jail and then using them as slaves. And unfortunately, even after 30 years of fighting with totalitarian states, it's still the case. So a lot of countries criminalizing even consumption of drugs or using drugs. And you could see some examples. Actually, even if the using drugs is not criminalized, could be criminalized the using in the public spaces, and your yard could be the public space. And actually, this the next slide will show the possession. And next slide. What this criminalization of use doing? First, people who use drugs not trusting any state officials. We here sitting here understand how different state officials are. Police different from medical services, how they are structured. But if there was any case when you called for ambulance, when your friend is dying from overdose, and they called police with them, and drug policy control police came with them, and two of you who called the police get arrested and get the 7 years in jail just for calling the ambulance, because it seems like you using together, so you shared, so this person, and your friend died, and you have 7 years in jail. Of course, you will never trust doctors. So that's the big challenge for us to start any education. But that's the point. We are speaking about prevention, but these people, when they are criminalized, they couldn't get the high education. And this criminalization of letting people out of their possible career, out of the thank you very much, out of the possible earning money. So that's why criminalization costs a lot of money, not just for the keeping system of police, prosecutors, and everybody busy. And for our region, that's the most popular article in the criminal code. These articles about the drug use and possession. Up to 50% of all people in jail sitting there in some countries. I will not say all the countries, but in some countries, they are only for drug use and possession. So it's the most popular article, and usually the human rights activists saying, look, if the drugs is put it in the pocket of media activists or human rights activists, then they recognize, okay, we have problematic drug policy. Until then, that's other lawyers, and that's important point how we could do. We need to get attention to the human rights activists, to the lawyers. You see this, the next slide. With the possession, you could not use drugs if you live with dependency, if you are not possessing it, and possession is criminalized even more. So that's why in totalitarian state they could put drugs in your car or in your pocket, and then you will be arrested and put it in jail for a lot of years. So you could see the what is the fines, and I will not go one by one, 28 countries, but there are none of the country who really decriminalize. But that's the point. Sometimes states could declare decriminalization and saying, Russia, decriminalize, Ukraine, decriminalize. Marvelous reporting, and that's about the reporting and good accountability of the drug policy and 10-10-10 targets in our target setting. Decriminalization in the law, it could means forced rehab, which could look like tortures. Rehabilitation means. And it called alternatives to coercive sanctions, everything you wanted. Decriminalization in case of possession could goes to the penalties, and then person is sitting in jail not for the drug possession, but not paying the penalties, which is 10 times more than let's say month's income. Next slide. You could see the comparison of the that's about penalization, actually. You could see the comparison of fines, minimum monthly wages, 10 times, and number of monthly, like you could see, sometimes it's not such tremendous, sometimes it is. And you could see the how these fines are big. And that's just the beginning. Some states, like, I will not shame and blame, but some states saying if you are not paying in first month, then it will double. And then it will double, or you will have 25% more. So decriminalization without depenalization, that's something which will not work. Next slide. And for what you could be as possession, put it in jail. And that's the key point for our region, because region want to, that's rather bureaucratic region, and we are regulating everything, or our states regulating everything. So we have very regulated thresholds. So, and you could see the comparison of threshold for marijuana. So if you possess this amount, more than this amount, it will mean that criminal or administrative offense will go. So it means for Ukraine, which is very bad example in this case, if you possess even leftovers in the syringe from your injection, you will be, you could be, yeah, we could go next slide. I guess there will be data on the, yes, for heroin. So if you possess this amount of leftovers in the needle, you could be put in jail. That's why harm reduction in the needle exchange not working in every country, because when you are keeping this needle with the leftovers, you could be the criminal already. So the presentation will be available, and you could see it in our webpage. We are analyzing this data all the time, and I need to say that this criminalization, it's always very a lot of layers in there, and that's why with the International Drug Policy Consortium, once we did a Global Drug Policy Index to compare countries not only with this criminal law, yes or no, but with all the layers of criminalization. Next slide. And that's about cost. We don't have the state expenses very good disaggregated to analyze, but our members, we have members in all these countries. You see, it's 28 countries of the Eastern Europe and Central Asia, activists and harm reductionists. And we tried to collect the open source data on what is cost of the harm reduction, which include needle syringe exchange, opioid agonist treatment, and even unemployment benefits in comparison with 1 year. 1 year harm reduction cost, 1 year keeping people in jail, because we don't have data to bring all the police costs, court costs, and everything, because it will be much more. And you could see in some countries, in some lucky countries where the jail are good and not torturing, they have even up to 15, 16 times more. They invest, they spend 15 times more in one person keeping in jail in comparison with harm reduction. And all people who are who got sentence in jail, they are in jail, but all people in need of harm reduction, they don't have a harm reduction. That's also not working like this. And you could find more data country by country if you will put criminalization cost, or will go to our webpage. Next slide. What we are doing, we not always have political will to decrim, but we are mitigating damage, or reducing damage of the harm of the criminalization. One of the issue for our region, it's bureaucratic region, the drug registry. Drug registry in our countries, it's instrument to not let you drive if you are in, to not let you do 100 of professions and jobs. So we are trying to make it really medical registry with keeping with protecting the personal data. That's report. Next. Maybe, yeah. So that's documented thanks to EJAF support. We had very marvelous project together with the 4 countries for the paralegal support, and that's actually documented and structured barriers for people who use drugs to prevention, to harm reduction, to receiving RT and medical services. I guess I named all of them. Let's go next slide. There are other issues with women. I couldn't avoid it. Women who use drugs, if they are in situation of gender-based violence, they do not have entrance to any of these services. Unfortunately, even shelters for survivors of gender-based violence always have the position that if you are active drug user, and this includes opioid agonist treatment. Obviously, all the restrictions, opioid agonist treatment is included. You are not allowed to step in. I'm rushing, and could you put several times to have all the picture? We already saw this this picture in the previous slides. Almost the same structure. What we are doing to reduce the damage. We are doing the systems. It's not only us. There are several systems in the region, and communities are documenting the case. And then there are 2 ways what we are doing with this. First way, it's to support the person. And usually peer support, we are calling paralegals. It's peer support, which is needed if the person is ready to go all this way, 5 years, 7 years, coming out, and all of this to strategic litigation. If person is ready, then we are going through all legal procedures, through all courses, but sometimes it's only mediation is needed with those who are. And the other way is to advocate. And you could see that paralegal services already even institutionalized in a lot of countries like Moldova and Kyrgyzstan. So state recognize this necessity of services, and they pay for paralegals from community to provide these services and this support for key populations to overcome this barrier, at least for one group of people or for one person. Next slide. And in addition to the usual criminalization, and that's the agenda of our Rise and Decriminalize movement, I will share some with you some communique. Rise Decriminalize movement and its joint movement of different communities against criminalization of different communities, because we are targeting one target and we have one audience to advocate for. That's political decision makers. So we have sex worker, SWAN, ECOM, NPUD, and EVNA. That's regional communities, and us who are uniting people who use drugs, sex workers, people living with HIV, and LGBT. Together, we understand that that's the layers of criminalization, but this is criminalization of activism. That's the most urgent issue in this region. Next slide, very fast. That's how Russia is doing through the political pro-Russian forces. I could guess that they will come to other countries, or already came, because they are learning these bad things. So they're claiming NGO as a foreign agent. If they receive international help, then they ban work. And now we are facing this in Kyrgyzstan and Georgia. Next slide. I'm rushing. And please use this QR code. You will see all our joint communique. That's very important for us to bring all people on board. I hope that it works. I don't know. I was trying to do this, but I'm not very good in techniques. Thank you. And next slide. You will read this communique and you will hear from us. That's 5 networks, and that's our QR of our joint movement, and we hope we will manage together. Next slide. I guess it says. Good. Sorry.
Thanks for a very rich, substantive, rich presentation. I know time's always against us, but before I open it up for questions, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Andrew Spielman, who's the Executive Director of Impact Global. So Andrew, we're going to have a conversation. Welcome. You've heard a lot what's going on, so I'm sure you do. Do you all know Andrew firstly? Who doesn't know Andrew? Andrew, tell us in 2 seconds about Impact Global. Let's go.
So I'm the executive director of Impact Global. We advocate for gay, bisexual, trans, queer rights in the health space. We've been active for 18 years now. We used to be called the Global Forum on MSM and HIV. And I'm a proud member of both the GPC and the South to South Learning Network.
Okay, so Impact Global, just in terms of prevention, I'm going to just run straight to the point. Like on the issues around law reform, policy reform for the MSM community in general, what do you think has been, if you look back over the last 2 years, what's been the biggest success that you think, hey, we can point to and learn from? And then looking forward, what keeps you up at night? What makes you around that law reform piece?
So in the last couple of years, I think we have seen some successes and we don't celebrate them enough. Mauritius is a great example. I know there's a Mauritius contingent at the conference. A lot of them worked on the decriminalization of sexuality, LGBT identity in Mauritius. It happened in 2023, the same time the Uganda Anti-Homosexuality Act was passed. And you can actually see when you talk to the activists, it wasn't an overnight thing. And of course, the media is like, oh, it's a, you know, the Supreme Court magically came to this conclusion. But it was after decades of work, changing narratives, activists building coalitions, and really changing how people felt about not only homosexuality, but homophobia. And so in the ruling, the Mauritius court actually said homosexuality is not the product of colonialism, homophobia is. And so they were very clear because a lot of the battles that we've seen, that we continue to see all over the world, everywhere in the world, we're seeing this. People are saying that homosexuality, LGBT identity is not natural. It's not part of the culture, when in fact, it's homophobia that was imported. It was homophobia that the colonizers decided to put. I mean, in Jamaica, it's even called an anti-buggery law. And it's very weird to, and nobody else uses the word buggery, by the way, but the British. So it's very weird to talk to people that are like, no, this is like part of the culture. It's like, no, they're literally using the word buggery in it. So I think that the Mauritius thing is really an amazing moment. You know, and I want to highlight the work they've done, the activists and the work they've done, as well as the courts, and kind of highlighting the role of colonialism and homophobia.
And looking forward then, so that's a sign of sort of success that we can sort of point to. Sorry, if looking back, you go, Mauritius is a good example, and we should do more of that in terms of that. What keeps you up at night, like around law reform and the work you're doing and the community what's your big worry at night?
Right now I'm based in the US, so I do have a worry in November, but I think many of us do. But I will say that what keeps me up at night is so far, one of the things that I've seen and that a real uptick in, and I'm scared because we're entering another election cycle, is that we've had partners in Zimbabwe and Kenya get vandalized and shut down in the last year by religious groups that vandalized and put graffiti all over their drop-in centers. This stopped, obviously, the staff from coming in. It stopped the community from being able to come in. It presented a clear security danger, and I'm worried that more and more of that will happen, that our NGOs will be targeted by groups, and that more and more people will say, hey, this is a good idea, let's attack this group, because nobody will investigate it. That's one of the other things that people have realized. A lot of times when violence happens, I really appreciated the Sasonke presentation, because when violence against our communities happen, nobody investigates it. Or they investigate and it's like, oh, it must have been a drug-related crime, which then therefore is excusable. And you're like, it's not. And it wasn't. There was, a lesbian activist who was killed in Kenya, and she was raped and killed a couple of years ago. And the police were like, oh, it was a drug case gone bad. And everyone that knew her was like, she didn't do drugs. And they just stopped investigating. And I think that the presentation from Eastern Europe really highlighted the fact that as soon as there's a blame that can happen for a key population, like, oh, we can say it's about sex work or drugs or sexuality, then everyone goes, oh, it's understandable. Yeah.
And just maybe just focusing now like on PrEP. So PrEP for MSM in the community, what do you see in terms of law and policy reform change that's going to help access? So if we say PrEP is, I'm not saying it's the magic bullet, but let's say PrEP should increasingly be used. What are the law and policy barriers that you're seeing for the community you represent?
It's interesting. I think PrEP is a great example of unequal access. Different countries have different rules about who can access it, how much it costs, how you get access to it. There are some countries that, yes, PrEP is accessible, but only if you prove you're at high risk. And to do that, you have to actually be exposed to HIV, which is kind of a bizarre idea if you think about it. Since the role of PrEP is supposed to prevent that risk. But there are some countries where you have to be exposed to HIV once or twice and be on PEP first before you can get access to PrEP. And so even though when they report to UNAIDS, they're like, oh, yes, we provide PrEP access, and UNAIDS says, it's great. They don't stop to say, what kind of PrEP access? Do men and women get PrEP access? And in some places, women don't get PrEP access. And so I think that that's really important that we talk about who has the access. Is it free? Is it low cost? Is it available? And then as we start seeing these new technologies emerge, like long-acting injectables, that becomes another challenge, right? Like, what are there rules against it? How long is the pipeline going to be? How long will it be for a pharmaceutical to allow a low-cost version of it to be provided in country across the world? So those are some of the things that I think PrEP is a good example of places where, you know, it seems like it's a great idea and some people say they do it, and they might, but it's not all the same. It's not all equal. And I think especially Global North folks tend to assume that it's the same set of, oh, it's free for everybody, and not really think about the various processes that are in place that stop it. And I think the other element of that is not only is PrEP available, but how can people get it? And if they're closeted, how are they able to access it? So we saw in the presentation of India, one very clever way. I love the zero cost add-ons on that bazaar. That's so clever, of ways that people can access PrEP even if they have to live at home with their families. Because a lot of times people don't want to take medication if they have to live at home with their families, and explain it.
Let's assume, Andrew, like in 2 years' time, when the next AIDS conference happens in 2026, and me and you're sitting having this conversation, what do you think from a policy perspective do you think is, you know, we've all said law reform takes time, we've heard that, but if we're having this conversation, what would you like to see as something that's realistic and practical and pragmatic that you think for the MSM community in particular around laws and policies that's achievable, that's really realistically that can be done, where we can collectively put our energies, and what would you need, and by you I'm meaning Impact Global, to help push that forward? If that makes sense.
It does make sense. Thanks, Kevin, for the question. I think what we would need as a community, and to be honest, I think that the Eastern European Harm Reduction Association presentation showed this, is we need to stop harmful narratives about each other. Like, every organization that's involved in the HIV movement needs to stop perpetuating harmful narratives about key populations. Doesn't matter if they're sex workers, people who use drugs, gay, bisexual men, trans people, people in prison and closed settings. We need to stop blaming people for societal ills, right? Like, oh, the economy's bad because this group has power, or, you know, or this group wants human rights. We need to stop perpetuating that. Just the other day, somebody was singing a song on stage at the Global Village that was like, you'd have to be stupid if you don't use a condom. And like, that was a clear message to me as a person living with HIV, what that person and who wrote that song and what they thought about. And people cheered it. And I was sitting there thinking, that's where we are. We're at an AIDS conference. And people are perpetuating messages that people that have HIV are stupid. I was like, no, I have HIV. We get to go to Munich for a conference.
Are you I'm going to say on a positive spin, but that sense of solidarity amongst, you know, we all talk about key populations, and we all know that they include men who have sex with men, transgender. Do you think there is more of or am I fooling myself? Do you think there's more of a collective solidarity amongst all the groups that we that we call key populations, because all of us are facing those ills in different ways. Do you believe that's there, or am I wanting to believe that? Does that make sense?
I think we work really hard to work together. I think a lot of people out doing the work, you look at Sasanke, you look at Eastern European Harm Reduction Coalition, you look at Impact, we work really hard to work across all communities because we can't have change without each other. And we're always, you know, if they're targeting one of us, they're targeting all of us. And so we do a good job. I think we work really hard to collaborate. It's not automatic. And I think that what you see looks organic and automatic because we are really fun, but we throw good parties. But it's also like, you know, it's a constant deliberate effort to make sure that those connections exist because we know that we're all threatened by the same laws. And I think that's part of the great thing about the community, bringing people together in the ways that South to South Learning does and the Global Prevention Coalition. You know, we need each other.
Last question from me. If I ask you to complete this sentence, the 10-10-10 targets mean this for me. What would that mean? So the 10-10-10 targets mean?
It would be amazing. It would be amazing. I think that they are visionary, and I would love it if they, you know, could happen. And I look forward to that world.
Do you think they will?
I think that a lot of the targets are not quite where they should be.
I know we've got some time. We've got time for questions. I know there's some. So there's some online. I'm going to start with our online people. So some questions. So please, can I have our panelists in the front, please? Coley, Ghana, please come, Sinjay. And I'm not going to ask you all to respond to the questions in the interests of time, as well as making sure we can take from the audience. So here goes. You've all heard of community-led monitoring, right? Everybody, yes. So this is the question from online, how can community-led monitoring help law reform, or can it? So let's go.
For us, in our definition, again, we have joint regional definition developed by all community networks and all groups together. We had effort to discuss it and to do the joint position. For us, community-led monitoring, it's not only monitoring of services and not only monitoring of state services, but also the human rights violations. So that's the basic data we could have on acting on decriminalization and criminalizing practices.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thoughts on that one, Andrew? CLM.
Yeah, I believe in CLM. I believe community-led monitoring. I think one of the challenges with CLM is getting people to know that they decide the agenda for what they're measuring and monitoring, and not the funder. So it's really important to always we go in there and we're like, that's great that you're measuring like how they greet you at the office, but also what other things are happening? What's your community concerned with? Not just what does the funder concerned with? And I think that that's always the challenge with CLM, but there's a lot of possibility there.
Community-led monitoring for law reform. We all know community-led monitoring is mostly around services. The question was, can it be used for law reform? It seems to be that it is. I'm going to move to the next question. Maybe this for you, Sinjay. Give me one example of, this was a question from online, one example of how law reform has really helped HIV prevention. So a very specific example, how law reform has helped HIV prevention.
I would say in the criminal law system, that hasn't been easy, but we're trying as communities. And also just to respond to the question of how can community-led help law reform to improve, it's sort of like a contradicting question, because we're monitoring the government that is actually not in support of the key populations services. If you are criminalized, you know, the communities that are being criminalized for being who they are, you know, sex work is criminalized. So then when we're monitoring the same people that actually are putting us in that awkward position.
Cool.
So for me, it's very confusing. It's a contradicting position, I think. But I would say communities, when they lead, it improves the showcasing, also amplifying the voice of the communities, because we need to be part and parcel of policy making involvement, because be included also because we know how best to do the work from the key population aspect.
Thank you. Practical example from India around law reform, around prevention. One example.
So in India, like we didn't have a law for HIV Act before 2014. And when 2014, the act was brought in, reformation was brought in, we saw a huge surge in the number of prevention and HIV care as well. So I think law reforms in the field of HIV will definitely bring in changes for both prevention and as well as cure.
Just so I understand, are you saying there was more people coming to access services because the law was protective? Or am I putting words in your mouth?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Ghana.
There are two examples. Estonia, instead of putting in jail, that's program called Sutik, the police is calling peer counselor from the community and redirecting without even the process, redirecting to the harm reduction to opioid agonist treatment. And this changed the situation for access to services. And the other was drug registry. As soon as Ukraine rid of the drug registry, this repressive drug registry, and didn't use it for all repressions before, then much more people coming for opioid agonist treatment and for harm reduction because they are not afraid of being registered. It's not working already in the final stage, but we already see the signs.
Questions over to you. Any questions here from the audience? Any thoughts? It's got to be a question. We don't want statements. We want questions. If you can introduce yourself. I see two hands. Here go.
Hi, my name is Tammy. I'm from Angola. I don't know have a question, but I want to share some ideas. We have a law for HIV prevention, but the same law has some challenge because they talk about the criminalization of people living with HIV. Since 1992, we have this law, but now we are trying to reform the law to protect, especially the key population. The law say we are protecting key population, but at reality, we always say we fight about the violence for the key population, especially the men have sex with another man and sexual worker. So we try to improve our law to avoid this crime because the number of discrimination is high. So it's like you say, it's confused. We have a law that protects, but the same law say that you are never better without it. So it's confused for us.
That's the man from the video.
Thank you so much. I apologize, first of all. I went to session 4 at the village and I was supposed to be in the panel, but thank God, Collie, she really did a great job. So one of South Africans' backlash in terms of key population laws and was when we sit with Gauteng, and then as a province, they decided for the first time they're developing what you call it your national strategic plan for sex workers prevention and like comprehensive plan. And then we put it through to the government of South Africa, and then we put so much decriminalization of sex work. Like Collie will be like, my son, if you don't know anything, just say decriminalize. Because remember, we are with academics, we are with nurses, we are powerful people, lawyers, and then it came back. When it came back, they removed the only decriminalization of sex work. It was removed. And the media went, whoa, sex workers. Like the media went insane because now it's a big story in South Africa. Then we went to the second, another one, which is another national strategic plan. We call it NSP. It's like the Bible of sex workers. And then we put again. So for the first time, as I'm currently standing here in Germany, we have the word decriminalization of sex work 36 times. Because meaning from 2016 to 2019, where decriminalization was only one, but it was removed. And then now, 2028, we're having a document. Okay, forget COVID. We're having a document because, okay, it was extended. Remember, it was extended. So we're having a document in South Africa that literally it has in it decriminalization of sex work appears 36 times, which is the biggest thing for us to fight the backlash that's happened. And I apologize again.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Manjeet.
So I wanted to ask a question. I think it was implied in one of the presentations, but is it easier sometimes to get the kind of law reform you need to be able to access services at the local level? So at a municipality level or a district or a province, rather than going national, which sometimes gets more politicized. So I'm just wondering if the panel could speak to any experiences in that. And I'll just give an example. In Bombay, in the 1990s, in the early 2000s, we still had the penal code provision in India criminalizing same-sex, but the BMC was able to, register Humsafar Trust, which was an NGO working with MSM, still able to provide services. So there were things that could happen at the local level because they weren't necessarily attracting a lot of political attention at the national level. So that's one kind of example. In other places, there are political or at local, or municipal regulations or ordinances, which can effectively remove barriers to accessing services. And I'm wondering if our community leaders have any thoughts on that.
Could I start just a moment? It's remove barriers, because we could remove barriers even in the hospital schedule or the behavior of one doctor. That's true. And locally, we could remove barriers which regulate the services, at least in our region, which regulate that's not law. But that's the formulation. If we want to remove legal barriers, local better. If we want to remove punitive law, you could never avoid the parliament.
In South Africa, there's laws that are being used, I think, at the district level. It's called the municipality bylaws. Sometimes if I walk on the street because I'm known that I'm a sex worker in that area, I just got arrested, even if I'm not with a client. And then when I get to the police station, it's a different story. And then they would, because sometimes they'll say, are you a sex worker? You say no. And then they said, empty your bag, you empty your bag and condoms come. Right? So then I become concerned sometimes to say, like in this conference, like I always carry condoms wherever I go because shit happens. Excuse my French. Even if someone might try to rape me or do something, I'll have to beg that person to say, can we then at least condomize? So then I should be arrested of carrying condom. That means everyone should be arrested. So they use municipality bylaws to arrest the sex workers, and then you had to, empty your bag and then you're arrested. When you get to the police station, it's a different story. And then they're no longer using the condom as the evidence for them that you are sex work. And then it would be said that it's municipality bylaws, public nuisance, all those kind of things. So the criminal aspect, I think it's the main barrier that we need to look into in anything that we're trying to do. Because for me, it is punitive laws, it is racism and discriminative apartheid colonial laws that we need to remove. Because we're talking democracy in some of our countries, but I don't see democracy while we're still having this kind of laws. I'll make an example in one of the sessions that we have advocated for the call for it almost 30 years. Now there's new government on board. That means we're still going to advocate for another 30 years to bring them on board because they're not familiar with sex work. They're not familiar with K population. They're not familiar with LGBTQI+. So the criminalization actually and the law reform and its development cannot be achieved under criminal law system. But also at the same time, the criminalization continues to negatively affect the implementation of policies such as healthy policies. As my colleague was saying, that we have had a national strategy plan for sex workers. The implementation part has not happened. It needs budget, it needs money. But how can we implement that plan in the criminal law system? Thanks.
I do a lot of work in Mexico, and Mexico is an example of a very large country where getting anything done nationally is so difficult because all the states have to agree to it. And so in Mexico, we do state by state because it is the only way through. And some of the ways to go through are actually not only to get some laws lifted, like HIV criminalization has been lifted in some states, but not all states. But sometimes it's about getting certain policies enacted, like overlooking certain transactions that are low harm, you know, that the police consider like nuisance laws, rather than, you know, like harassing people on the street for loitering, to seeing if they're sex workers. Like, that's not really something you should be doing. Like, no one needs that. So, you know, that's a context where working locally actually is more effective.
In India, I'll give you 3 examples. One is we are also part of a political group where it's called a professional Congress group, All India Professional Congress, where we kind of sensitize the local bodies. And for the first time in India, we hoisted a pride flag in their office space, which has never happened. And sensitizing these local bodies is going to take it further ahead to the national level leaders, who are in turn the or policy makers at a national level. And in India, like, you can have state-wise orders. So Chennai, Tamil Nadu is a state, and where Chennai High Court has issued so many progressive orders that is applied to only Tamil Nadu state, where we can take Tamil Nadu as a role model, and then like ask for more equal reforms or policy reform. And also one more thing is like the 1% reservation for the transgender community across all levels. That also has been implemented in certain states, where we take that as a policy and ask for national level reformation now.
In the interest of time, before I pass over to Mandeep, I saw lots of questions coming up around advocacy for the long term. How do you engage parliamentarians when they change all the time? And I think that's what we saw from that evidence review. It's not one of these tactics. It's a combination of these tactics, and it's continuous. And that, I think, has been, at least you say to me, one of the big take-homes from this conference is that the work around law reform has to be supported and funded, and national key population groups need to be supported because it's a long-term effort. And it doesn't mean that there aren't chances of a success, but we also need to, let's be honest, we need to do a better way of making the narrative around the links between the HIV response and law reform crisper. And maybe that's, I'm going to put as our collective challenge. But I'm going to first give these guys a big hand. Thank you. And I'm going to pass over to Mandeep for some closing comments. Mandeep.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Kevin, for moderating. I think, you know, I was supposed to highlight some key takeaways and actions, but I think the last panel has really put some very, very impressive things on the table about allyship, about working across communities. One of the things that I want to highlight that I think is really important, where the multilateral system, where the joint program, you know, where academic institutions can really play an important role, is the role of inclusive institutions, right? Law reform doesn't happen on its own. It's not all on the most affected communities. Their voice and their work is the most powerful, but the institutions have a really important role to play, whether that's the judges, the parliamentarians, the politicians, the leaders, the UN system. We have to be inclusive. And that's really important. And I think one way of becoming more inclusive, more sensitized, and I have to say, after 40 years, I learn new things every day when I listen to particularly what's happening at the community level. And so creating the safe space, the platforms for communities, especially criminalized communities, to be able to speak with decision makers, to sensitize decision makers, to make institutions more inclusive, I think is one of the big things that's really important. The joint program on the joint UN program on AIDS, which includes a number of co-sponsors, some of them are in the room, a secretariat. We have an important role to play to bring you together with the UN system, but also with decision makers and institutions in your countries. I think there's lots of tactics and strategies. I hope that you're going to not only, if you can take a hard copy, great. For people who are online, you can find these online. And we really, we came to this conference with a UNDP delegation that was 80% key population representatives from the countries that we're working in. I think that's what we need to do more of. We need to get people together, share, learn more from each other, and we need to get more resources into the hands of communities to do this work. It's critical. We have these exciting new prevention technologies. Yes, removing the intellectual property barriers is really important, not just in low-income countries, also in middle-income countries. Super important. But once we get them there, we need to get them to people. And that's not going to happen without community-led reform of punitive laws, removal of these punitive laws, removal of stigma and discrimination, and the achievement of gender equality and the removal of gender-based violence. UNDP is leading the way with a 1010 campaign. It's a historic opportunity. In 40 years, I have never seen a UN document that is so strong, so concrete on human rights. It's always some language in the preamble, but the actionable part that's signed off by member states, these 1010 targets are our opportunity to really make progress. We should also use the resolution that's just come out of the Human Rights Council, also incredibly powerful. We need to use these tools. And your leaders in countries have signed up to these. So we now need to hold them accountable. And so look out for the campaign, soft launch now, but we'll have a bigger launch around the UN General Assembly. And it's not a UNDP campaign. It is a campaign for all our partners, UN family, community partners, to really, really raise the voice and keep the pressure up on these 1010 targets. Thanks very much, everybody. And thank you for all the amazing work we do. Thanks.